board with details of like where it came from, stuff like that? Pretty much nobody. Maybe one person. Yeah, someone back there is going to be bored to death. All right. Because I've got basically I was asked to come and speak to you guys about Dwarf Fortress, and I don't really have a talk that I give about Dwarf Fortress. So I just sit working on it all day. But so I received about 20 questions, and the idea right now is to kind of go through them, or basically give a talk that answers all of them. And hopefully it won't be too boring. I can kind of see people out there, so and I can kind of hear people out there, so feel free to interrupt any time, ask questions. I don't want to just sit here and drone on. I'll probably bore you guys to death, especially because I don't have too many pictures or anything.
Let me interrupt you for a second, Tarn.
Yeah.
The mic's at your seat, guys. If you press those buttons, that'll put you straight into the call, and he'll be able to hear you much better.
You push it once.
Yeah, maybe we should give that a shot now. Somebody, anybody, everybody.
Check 1, 2.
Anybody?
Mike, you want to try yours?
Check.
They're not on?
Check. Check. Check.
Over there.
I'm Homer Simpson, man. I'm doing the mic check.
At least I'll be able to hear people laughing.
Check. Check 1, 2.
Couple more.
Check.
Check.
All right. There you go. Yeah. All right. Turn on. Could you hear them, Tarn, when he was?
I can only hear laughter. I don't know if we pick one person.
Can you hear this?
Loudly. Try that again.
Can you hear this?
Yes, I can. That was good.
Okay. Awesome.
All right.
He should be hearing it through the mic there.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah, so there might be 2 tries for every question, but we'll eventually get them heard and answered.
So I have your images on the other screen, Tarn. So if you want to tell me which ones to put up when, I can do that.
Yeah, I have them in roughly the order. Right now, I saw up there. There's the little fortress on the left, kind of thing, up there.
Yeah.
And that was just the point of that picture was just for people. If there was someone in here who hasn't played the game before, who'd be completely lost. This is going to be the image that we kind of go back to, or just leave up there, just for context. Although I'm not going to be talking about it specifically, but so Dwarf Fortress is for people who don't know what it's about. It's a kind of a city building game. It also has a small RPG part where you could take control of a person, kind of like a roguelike game. If you've played those like NetHack or Rogue or any of the other ones, Adam, Moria, those kind of things. But the main part of the game is controlling dwarves in a fortress, digging it out there. You see on the left, we've got 7 little happy faces, 6 there maybe, in a little meeting room. Bedrooms are on the top left of the picture. Stone is stored down on the top left that appeared as we were digging the place out. There's a couple of workshops, which are the random characters at the bottom. And the reason it's just a kind of cyan blue on the right is that's sky as the cliff drops away. You see the up arrows and down arrows are the ramps, which is actually the slope of a hillside that we've carved into. So that happened around 2007. You can kind of go in and out through different D-slices of the map, which makes the game all the more easy to play. And so we've got so that's the idea. So people have a context for what's going on here. So I figured I'd just start at the beginning because a few people were curious about where the game came from. And just go through that, and you know, if anyone's got any questions, we'll go through that process of of actually getting me to understand what you're saying. So this is a game that turned into this. I mean, the goal for the game is to kind of maybe not de-emphasize Fortress mode, but add so many things to the game that Fortress mode is just a big part of the game. And it's really a sort of a fantasy world simulator. There's a gigantic world we'll get to, an image of that in time that's going on around here, where more and more things are happening. The version I'm currently working on is adding a lot of activity to the world there. But Dwarf Fortress itself started as a much smaller project. There was a large one I was working on, which is the Fantasy World Simulator, which is Slaves to Armagh, God of Blood. That was the original game I was working on, and it was a kind of bizarre 3D. You'll see how bizarre in 3D it was. A fantasy game that had like how curly each hair was on different parts of your body, and you could lose your skin and eyes, and all this strange, really specific detail about it without trying to build the world at all. Whereas Dwarf Fortress came out of a little side project I was writing at the time. So I was writing a game based on there's this old game called VGA Minor, or Minor VGA. It was back in the days when file names were 8 letters, so they just called it Minor VGA. But it was about digging down below a little depot where you're supposed to be getting enough money to marry your girlfriend, and she had lost her wedding ring in the outhouse or something, and that was the whole story of the game. And you just kind of go down this elevator, dig through something that looks pretty much like what we've got here, except it's you're getting a slice vertically. So you go down this elevator, dig to the left, find treasure or minerals and little hazards, and then bring them back up to the depot, make money, and hopefully you get enough to buy a diamond for your wedding. And I guess there's a secret where you can also put a piece of dynamite under the outhouse and explode it, and you find her old ring, and you can just win that way. But it was a really, really simple game, hard. And so I wanted to make a game kind of like that, just because I used to make just a side project that, take a couple of days. There's a bunch of them on our site, like World War I Medic and Liberal Crime Squad. That's just these very small games that we produced while we were working on Slaves to Armagh. And so this was going to be another one. It was called Mutant Miner, and you're a miner like in Minor VGA, except instead of finding minerals, you find these kind of mutagen canisters, and you mutate yourself, growing more arms so that you can carry more picks and stuff that can mine faster. It's a very strange turn-based game where you're just controlling one miner, and we wanted you to be able to control more than one miner. It fell apart because it was very annoying, like those old, I don't know if people play the old Gold Box SSI games where you kind of move between your party members, and when there were like 50 orcs or whatever, it just got to be like a turn, and it would move very, very slowly. So we had that problem with the Mutant Miner game, and so we decided to make it real time. And we kind of, my brother and I, whenever I say we, it's my brother who works on these things with me. We decided to make it real time to get rid of the problem of having multiple team members. And when we talked about it, we were like, well, we eventually ended up with the idea that it would be dwarves in a mountain. And so we had this game looked pretty much like this, where you had your dwarves running around digging, and we had this other idea that you'd have an adventurer come in after you screwed up to kind of just look around at the remnants of your civilization, give you a high score. There'd actually be a high score list. And that was supposed to take 2 months. 2 months we'd finish that. It'd be one of our larger side projects. And then we put it up, and that was in 2002. All the while we were working on Armagh, which is our big game. And Armagh itself came out of we'd always been writing a fantasy game ever since I was a little kid. So that would be the next picture. The next picture here is I don't know if people are seeing these things or not. But if you're seeing it, this is from elementary school. Not this image itself, but because I played it later on, you can tell because I put the name of my cat for my character. But this was obviously kind of D&D influenced, but I'm not sure if it was directly D&D. We might not even have been playing D&D much when I wrote this. I think I started this when I was 10. It has, but we had games that were based on D&D, and that was kind of the influence there. So there you have your hit points. You also measure your IQ. That's for spell casting there. And enter a number from 1 to 6 does nothing. It doesn't even save that variable. I guess we thought that was funny. We thought it was funny at the time. And then the next slide, that's how the game starts. Apparently not a master of grammar at the time there. You are now entering the mountains. And the next one this is what the main part of the game looks like. So it picks a monster just at random and gives you its stats and 2 moves first. And the skeleton's first move, not that brilliant there. Hit himself in the head. And then you fight back and forth, and it's just like this. You go through a series of battles. The next one is when the skeleton's been killed. You randomly get your hit points back, and then you randomly increase your intelligence. And I think once your IQ gets up to 200, you can start casting magic spells. It was just the way we decided to do that mechanic. Yeah, not a master of the apostrophe. It's there either. That's a complicated one, though. People don't learn that one in high school either. And you can switch out the equipment. There's all kinds of bugs about whether or not it actually gave you the equipment when you asked to have it switched. And so next one, this is after you kill the skeleton. It kind of gives you a review. So this game was called Drag Slay, and this was the one that we wrote in BASIC. There was another one that we wrote later that I unfortunately don't have any pictures of in C. When I was in high school, it was a much better game. Kind of the one we were actually working on our fantasy world simulator for the first time, but it doesn't compile anymore. And this one still runs. You can still just grab a copy of QBasic or whatever it's called these days and fire it up. So you eventually get to. So if you hit something really hard, apparently it throws up this next screen. Again, must have thought that was fun at the time. And I think if you get hit really hard and die, it throws up a big red screen that says you've been gutted like a suckling pig, and then it just tosses you out to the DOS prompt. And then the next one is this is fighting the dragon. This is the first dragon you fight. I think there were 5. They all have little special abilities. This one shoots fire at you. Other ones can swallow you or strangle you. So I got hit in the head and killed, and it constantly makes fun of you for losing IQ points when you get hit in the head. So that's at the bottom there. So this was our first fantasy game, and so after this one, we worked on the C version of Drag Slave, which had an overland map. It had towns. It had little armies moving around and sacking the towns kind of at random. And you could go to the caves where the monsters lived and fight them and stop them from sacking the towns. And it was all just kind of active while you were moving around, kind of our first little procedural world. And that was back in 1993, and I worked on that one all the way up till 2000. And that one, it's kind of a shame that it was lost. There was bar fights and all kinds of other things. That's where the Dwarven Hammerer came from. There were human, dwarven, and elven towns that you'd try and protect from the wandering monsters. And the humans had the Lasher, who would whip you if you started bar fights or killed people in the town. And the elves had a guy hit you with a cane. But the dwarves had the Hammerer, and so you'd always fear dwarven justice in that game because they just beat you to death with a hammer. And so we carried that over to the Dwarf Fortress. And at that point, we were starting to make more games, trying to use DirectX, doing graphics. I used one of those books where you type in code and so on, and figured out how to do polygons before there were things to help you do polygons, where you'd had to do them all manually with the pixels, and made little spaceship games and so on. And then we decided to take our fantasy game and give it graphics. So we went through a few iterations of that until we arrived at Slaves to Armagh, God of Blood. And this is something I worked on for a year or so, and then we started. I started grad school at that time and made my website. I was back in 2000, and so I put up this game that was just not. It was not a game. It was just this thing I was working on. So that's the next image here. This is around 2003 or 4, I think. So we had this. This was our little random face maker. This guy has lost his eye during the course of the game, so your model would change. And you get your, so you could lose your eyes. You could have, there were spells that took your skin off, and it would get rid of the skin on the model. Very disgusting. There are spells that could teleport. You could pick any of the body parts that had ears, the eyes, the nose. I don't remember if there were tongues and lips. I think too much stuff. And all of your organs, you could teleport them, and then you'd just die, or be missing your nose or whatever. It was pretty disgusting. So I have a few more slides from that. I don't even remember what they are, so we'll just go through them. Next slide. This is just a bug with the face generation. If you miss any of the coordinates, bad things happen, and you end up getting your face pulled off. Next slide. That's one of the spells. That guy got his head blown up. Those little pieces will fly out and just kind of bounce on the landscape, and then the person will crumple over and die. Then the next slide. So this is part of the procedural stuff that we had in this game. These are different fur patterns. This is a creature covered with hair. You can kind of see down behind his tanned leg. There's a little black nub. That's his tail. And so he's also standing on one foot. That was a weird feature of this game. This game is a very bottom-up game. This is the game that taught us many lessons for how not to program Dwarf Fortress, basically. You could pick any of your body parts, any number of them, and it would come up with the animations for how the person should walk, and they try and balance themselves a bit. So this guy is standing on one foot because the player chose to do that. And then they kind of just hop along on one foot. It was not like the more advanced kind of ragdoll games they had. This was I certainly didn't know how to do that stuff, and that stuff was probably just starting at this time. This was in the early 2000s. So it was not. There was nothing amazing going on here. Just meticulous and kind of stupid. And there it is. But it generated the textures for different fur patterns, and there were giant paragraphs where it would describe, what the pattern was there for no particular reason. The next one, we had a survival mode, but it was not like games where you have a survival mode that's, facing kind of infinite number of waves of enemies or something like that. This just meant that you couldn't die. So this is a person who's been chopped in half, and that's one leg left, and they're balancing on it there, so it's the same as the last image, but it's just a little neat filler. And then the next image is someone who chose to stand on their hand. You can see the wonderful interface on the right and intuit what the different symbols mean. But the one in the center of the gray area on the right means that you're holding an unusual stance, and there's that's another kind of cat person or something with a tail and kind of a model pattern standing on their hands, and you can walk along on your hands like that. So it's kind of but the game didn't get much further than that. I don't know if there's any other slides. No, that's the last slide is just a world map, and that's the last image I have for today, because we're not going to be talking about stuff that really needs images, or maybe it will, and people will be hopelessly confused. We'll see. But so that was Armagh, and that game's still online. It's not linked to, but if you go to bay12games.com/Armagh, you can get it and mess around with it. It's buggy and doesn't work and all that kind of thing, but you can probably still do some stuff with it and see all this kind of garbage in action. But that game was my first game that got, over a couple 100,000 lines of code and not up to the best standards and practices and so on. So it just kind of fell apart. It wasn't completely that it collapsed under its own weight, although that was bound to happen. It was that Dwarf Fortress had been underway for about 3 years then in 2005 and was just stealing things from Armok. It was becoming our fantasy game. It was taking more and more things about, do we have body parts and that kind of thing, these kind of low-level details. But also, I found that when I was still working in the kind of text ASCII graphics, I was adding things a lot faster. And in this game, I had to draw them, and you see what the results of me trying to draw things are. It was just a 1,000 times faster work on Dwarf Fortress, and we started having things like world map and towns and so on. Although some of those things came later, but those details were being put in, and we could finally see that this fantasy game we wanted to make is actually going to be like the old Sea Drag Slay, not something that I'm just working on these graphical details. So I think that answers the first couple of questions I got about where the game come from and what's sort of the time scale of development. I've been working on it forever and going to keep working on it. The goals I have set up for Dwarf Fortress, they're all ambitious and long term. And I say I'm not going to finish for 20 years, that kind of thing. That seems like what it's going to be like. We've been working on it for 10 years now, and we're a third of the way through, according to the goals. Who knows what's going to happen, but I'm still working on that. So I don't know if there are any questions about that stuff. I'm not sure it's the kind of thing people have questions about. It's just a story about the origins. Because I was going to move on now to specific mechanics and things that people had questions about. People all cool. Everyone happy so far? Can just kind of see you out there. Okay.
Does anyone have any questions they want to ask?
Yeah.
No?
What was that?
How many lines of code is Dwarf Fortress right now?
Tap your mic.
Was that lines of code?
How many lines of code is Dwarf Fortress now?
Well, let's fire it up here. Okay. Now, there's this thing you can do. This is what this guy in the military told me. The way they count lines of code is do a find in files per semicolon. It's not a precise count, but it's as good as anything you can get, and it's chugging away, but it goes fast. Here we go, and it's done. All right. 381,764. So, pretty big. Bigger than anything I've written. Hard to manage. Haven't looked at some of those lines of code in many years. They just kind of sit there and you hope they still work, and then after a while they don't. And you have to go back and look at them, and then you're kind of horrified. You're like, I wrote that 8 years ago, and I didn't know what I was doing. And it's not like I know what I'm doing now, so it's especially bad. Yeah. Anything else?
Do you comment your code a lot whenever you're looking at it? So whenever you can go back and look at it, or just kind of fly by the seat of your pants?
No, there's a couple things I do. First of all, I'm really careful about my variable names now, and some of my function names are a little long-winded. So not that long-winded, but it's readable. It's kind of English, human readable in a lot of places. So that helps, and it kind of functions as a comment. And I also comment. I'd say I comment every 10 lines or so, just to kind of give myself my bearings. I can read my code. But if I've got a loop that's just moving a bunch of X and Y coordinates around, and you'd have to work to figure out what it was again, then there'll be comments kind of telling me what to do. But I don't do these things you see sometimes where a person will comment at the end of every line and just be like, I added to the X value and stuff like that. That never made sense to me. But there are some comments. It's not as bad as you might think, but probably not up to industry standards, whatever those standards might be. But it's survivable. Probably more so in the last 7 or 8 years when you're really going back into the depths of it. There's stuff that I have to muck through, and then I always try and, it's like the campsite rule or whatever, you always try and leave things better than you found them. So slowly the whole me to talk about here, and we'll continue with questions after I get through the next part. Okay, so people ask questions about world generation, the economy, fluid dynamics, accessibility, that kind of thing. So I'll just talk about those in turn, and then if there are other things people want me to touch upon, we can get to those. I should be able to talk about whatever. So we'll start with world generation. So this is the last slide I had was just the world for people that haven't seen it. And I don't know what you're seeing, if you're seeing part of it. It's a gigantic image, so I don't know if you're seeing the whole image or if you're seeing part of the image and have to scroll through it. But there's a world. It's probably a year or so out of date, but it's about right for what worlds look like now. All kinds of little symbols designating biomes and towns, roads, and it builds that. If you've played the game, then you know how world generation works. It's the first thing you see when you start the game. You say, I want to create a world. You give it some parameters. You can either muck around with these gigantic details of lists and lists of parameters, or you can just answer a few questions, and it'll create a world for you. And then it goes through quite a long process, and it can take an awful long time on your computer. The first thing it does is just generates a basic height map, and for that I kind of use the least advanced method available for procedural generation, which was just a midpoint displacement, and it's a fairly simple thing to understand. So take a grid. That's what we're doing. We've got a grid here, and we want to give it a bunch of altitude numbers. Put numbers in the corners of the grid, and then you've got midpoints of your sides, right? If you've got all four corners set up, then you've got four midpoints, top, bottom, left, right. And you can average the corners of each of those edges, and that would give you a number for the sides, right? And you can put a giant wiggle at first. And then you've got 8 points, right? All of the edges. And the edge points, the 4 edge points, give you a center point. And so you can average the four edge points. You get the center point, wiggle that, and you've got now 9 points. But the important thing is that those 9 points define 4 squares, right? And so you just repeat the algorithm. And the algorithm's done. You actually get a map. The key is to the wiggle that you apply, just divide it in half each time. So the wiggle smooths out, the averaging smooths out, and you get a little fractal map. There are improvements to that algorithm. There's the diamond square algorithm, which makes you shift your midpoint so that instead of squares, you're kind of shifting offset to the dual set every time, and that removes some of the vertical and horizontal artifacts that you can still notice in my maps, because I never get around to cleaning that up, because the way a lot of my things iterate on smaller squares, diamond squares are a little more difficult to implement because you have to get outside of your square. And I'm content with the maps as they are, but they do have some vertical and horizontal artifacts that could be removed. And then there's more advanced things these days. Perlin noise, for instance, is basically just defining it's like adding waves, basically. Waves with lower and lower amplitude, and add a bunch of them together. And so you've just got a function defined for x, y, where you add a bunch of waves together, and so you've got and they're just randomized again. So there are lots of different things. I think that's what most people used at least a while ago, was Perlin noise for random generation, and I'm sure there's all kinds of new specialized stuff now. But I just used a basic algorithm to get the height map. And once you've got the height map, you set the ocean at some altitude, whatever your parameters say, however much water you want, you just kind of fill it up. And then you've got basic mountains and lower regions, and then the ocean. And I apply at that point a kind of curving to make the mountains taller and the plains a little flatter. So it's all the whole lesson for this kind of world generation is about massaging your results after you just throw in any kind of algorithm you can think of to get the basic data set you want, and then mess with it afterward. Always just don't try and prefigure your result too carefully, because it's like chaos theory, right? It's impossible to know what you're going to get when you make your system complicated enough, and you can just mess with it afterwards to save your game. Kind of like any time I had something, it's just like dropping a bomb in the game, and then you try and rescue it afterward. It's very heroic. So we've got this map here, and after that, you can start flowing water down these slopes that you've created for yourself, just by dropping points at the top of the mountains, having them flow downward, and then you can affect the elevation. So it'll start carving river channels just where it naturally tends to go. And so you can see that when it runs this kind of erosion simulation when you start world generation. They'll start with these mountains, and then they'll kind of wear away, and you'll see some grooves show up in places that it was tending to flow down. And that gives you a basic shape, and then at the very last step it says, okay, let's keep some of these rivers and fill out some lakes and so on. And so you get then the water on the map. After that, it randomly determines where rainfall is, and it randomly places just a bunch of soil everywhere and comes up with drainage type properties that don't necessarily depend on the soil types now like they should. But and you can put in temperature. It just defines one pole right now. It's kind of strange. You have one pole in the world, and it defines temperature from that. So then you have temperature, rainfall, drainage, and all of those properties add together to make biomes. And that's when we get the biome map up there. There are a few extra things, like for rainfall, it'll actually look at the rain shadows and orographic precipitation, that kind of thing, where based on the direction of the winds, it kind of just, it has very, very simple winds right now where it's just based left, right, like in the world where you have trade winds and then doldrums and that kind of thing, just left, right. And so it'll say, well, the rain's coming from the left, so when it hits the mountains, the rain falls on that side, and then it's shadowed on the other side, and that's why you'll see desert strips on one side of the mountain range or the other. So it'd be like that desert in east of Chile, for example, with the kind of the Andes create the driest place on Earth on the other side, where the rain is all being dropped on one side of the mountains and it's dry on the other. And there are a few other things like that. And this was all just not when you're not 100% satisfied with how the biomes look, you want to add some more variability. You just put in details like that, following the real world examples that you've got to work with, and the map ends up looking better, and it's good. Like I'm sure if we put in some kind of tectonic simulation in the beginning to kind of grind some ridges out of the mountains would look better. They'd get a little narrower and have some kind of non-vertical, non-horizontal features to them, and it would end up looking better. And that's probably something that we'll attempt at some point. Just these little things that you can do always make the map look better. So that's the basic generation of the map, and then it comes down to the details. It loads up all your text files with all your creatures and plants that you can set up, and the game comes with several hundred little creatures and plants, and it places them in appropriate to their biome, and then it places monsters and civilizations, and then there's the whole second part of world generation, the one that takes all the time, where you sit there and watch history go by, and that process has just gotten more and more and more complicated, which is why it kind of grinds out. Now there's wars and trade networks being set up between the different cities that are developed, and little vassalages are set up where the villages will pay in to the places that rule them. And if you walk around now, you have that RPG mode. If you walk around town, and there's little workshops and everything everywhere, they aren't that detailed, but they have items in them for sale. All of those items were kind of numerically tracked during world generation, and so it can keep track of the towns where they came from, that kind of thing. So that's why the people hawking stuff in the market will be able to shout where something is from, and it's actually from that place. And it had the little trade network moving that stuff around the world generation. And so it's kind of segueing into the next topic people want to talk to me about was the economy, where the economy is going, that kind of thing. And so where it is now is in world generation, it sets up these little trade networks and it tracks the goods moving around. There's very basic kind of supply-demand setup for that, just to kind of grease the wheels or stop them at times when things would be too expensive. So people know what they want and they kind of charge a price for it. But to keep things moving, they're allowed to carry a debt that they try and pay off later. But it's not held by particular people or rulers or anything like that. It's not that interesting yet. And the goods just kind of move around the world. It just gets things moving around, and the populations will kind of follow the money a little bit, which is why you'll get these mixtures of races in the town. Sometimes they're basically following the economic data. But after that, there's no, in fortress mode right now, there's no kind of supply-demand pricing or anything like that. And we'd like to get to all that kind of thing. I've been assured that it's impossible, of course, to set up an economic simulation that's going to work. But it doesn't really matter if it works, right? Because conflict and horrifying situations that we want in the game come from economies falling apart. So if there's, sudden breakdown in the food supply, well, I mean, I've been reading a lot because I don't know anything about economics or anything. So I've been reading all these kind of history of economic history of Europe type dense books, reading about, and it's basically a story of disasters and famine and a lot of industry and people being smart about their little capitalistic principles and things. But ultimately, a lot of people starving to death and so on. So we'll fit right in when it doesn't work. It'll be great. So I'm not worried. I'm not worried about not being able to because no one's really created good economic simulations. People do. I mean, people, of course, are working very hard at your university with their economics degrees and math degrees and economics and so on, creating simulations and so on. But it's a difficult thing to do. The more parameters you add, just like a weather simulation or whatever, with more difficult to understand things going on. But as long as the game has the basic villages producing food, the food feeding the markets and the market towns and so on, it's not going to get too bad. There's the overall, is there a drought, that kind of thing that we have a lot of control over in the game, just because we control the weather. We control whether or not there's droughts, and we can kind of go in and not have a drought if things are getting too bad, although I'd like to let it ride as much as possible. Then civilization's not going to disappear. Things will just be tight sometimes if the trade networks break down, and it's an adventure to fix the trade networks. If you've got your dwarves, you can insert a fortress that'll fill a need, or have your adventurer eventually ride around. We have this whole kind of development arcs for adventurers. There's a hero role, the thief role, treasure hunter, slayer of night creatures, that kind of stuff, which is adventure type things. But we also had a few in there for exploring and trading, and this would be, it's kind of those games like Port Royale and these attrition, these sort of games that involve a lot of trading and building up. You'd be able to take advantages of problems with the economic simulation, basically, to fix problems, fill needs, exploit people, that kind of thing. So I'm not worried about jumping into that and just kind of riding the surfboard, crashing all the time, and so on. But so that's hopefully I answered the question, just kind of rambling on a bit about that with the economy. So a couple more things, and then we'll open up for questions again. Other people are interested about how the fluids work. Fluids, it is the probably the most complicated sort of physicsy part of the game, because cave-ins are simple. Cave-ins just do a flood fill. They used to be a little more interesting back when the game was 2D, but when the game became 3D, it was hard to keep it interesting without killing the computer. So right now it just says, is it connected? And if it's not, it drops. Pretty simple. There are all kinds of material properties and things that come into play during combat, the yield and fracture points, that kind of thing. But that's all. It's not that interesting as a simulation. It just looks at the numbers and sees if you've surpassed them. Basically, it has little wiggles for whether or not you've got an edge, that kind of thing. But the fluids are somewhat interesting. Again, not that much. You can only have so many simulations running simultaneously with such a level of detail. But so if you haven't played the game, there's water and magma, and water occupies any of the tiles, and it can be anywhere from level 0 to level 7. And 7 means that you're filled with water. And there's kind of a game of life cellular automaton going on here, where it'll take the water. In the most simple case, if you place a square just out on a field of 7 water, it'll look at the adjacent squares, divide it up, drop them off, and anywhere else on the map there's water, it just looks at all the squares and then it comes up with what the next map will look like. Oftentimes with these things, you'd create another map in memory and kind of have your old map and your new map, and so that no square is preferred based on which direction you're going. You can kind of just put the final result over here without just writing in memory where your water is. We didn't have that luxury because the map is 200 by 200 by 200 or something like that, right? So there are many squares. So what we did instead is just staggered it. So you do like every 4th square, and then you do the water for that. But there are 10 clicks per second, so you can tell it's happening if you have one little hole in your water. Like if you have a field of just 7s with 1 6, you can see the 6 kind of moving around, kind of running with the pattern that the water uses, and it'll just go like right, down, left, right, up, down, left, or whatever, and you can kind of tell what's going on. But for the most part, the water just looks like it's flowing outwards into empty spots, and that would be like the kind of basic sort of falling sand simulations. Those things have gotten very complicated, but the very initial ones where it's just things drop down, they plop, and they flow outward. And the problem with that is that if you have, say, a lake, a surface, and you put a 7 on top of it, or put a column of 7s, like a waterfall, on your lake, then what you're going to get with that algorithm is kind of a mound of water that flows slowly outward like a melting pyramid. And that's what we do with magma. We stuck with that. So it looks like this mound that flows outward over your lake. But that's not really satisfying for water at all. It looks funny, and you might as well remove the water from your game at that point, or have a kind of more abstract game that isn't going for sort of a realistic look, because your waterfalls will flow out of the rivers and just kind of flow over the land in this big mound. So we do when water falls into water, when water's on top of water, it does flood fills outward. So if there's a river flowing off the edge of the map, it'll seek outward and hit the edge of the map and be gone. And there's various kind of little checkbook accounting things to make this faster, because it's slow to flood a lot. So it can kind of mark which water is stable. Like if a flood fill fails, like if you had a contained sort of cistern you made for yourself and you drop water in it, the flood fill would fail. It wouldn't find an outward place to dump the water. So it marks all of that water as stable, and then it doesn't need to run the algorithm again. It starts filling it, and then you get more and more stable level. That works. That kind of solves the waterfall problem. And then there's just kind of luxuries for yourself. Like if you've got a U-shaped vertical U, you'd want the water to equalize on either side, right? And that's another problem that's difficult. But what we decided to do for that, solve it up to a point, is to take the water, when it does its flood fill, it's allowed to go upward in the flood fill up to the original level it was at, minus 1. So water in a U will equalize up to the point of being 1 level off. when its flood fills out, and it'll prefer a lower area. If it can just dump downward, it'll go for that. But after that, it'll start equalizing upward, and so you can get a little pressure stimulation without much more work. Once you've already eaten the flood fill, then pressure comes for free, basically. But the flood fill is expensive, especially as the map gets bigger and you've got larger bodies of water. But for the most part, it's either rivers or stable water that isn't going to accept many flood fills. So in the end, it's not a nightmare. There are some slowdowns, especially when you have a giant body of water and then you start to empty it or start to do some kind of gigantic construction, then the game just chokes. But for regular purposes, it works all right. So that I don't know if I've answered the question, of course, but that's how the fluid dynamics works in the game. I don't remember if there's anything else interesting about it. There are things like the water table, which just basically generates water. It doesn't try and keep track of all the water in the earth or whatever, and it just kind of puts water. So you can lead to some weird situations like a little pillar that generates water, but it's okay for now. And there's the water magma interaction. I mean, that just basically makes obsidian in the game, as unrealistic as that might be. And one of the extensions we always wanted to make to this was just adding more fluid. It's a difficult problem, especially when you come up with how do they mix. Like, you wanted to have places that were bad. We like places that are bad, so rivers of blood, that kind of thing. We've got blood rain now was a fairly recent addition, but it doesn't actually turn into liquid that can flow. It just turns into these puddles that are just more like items than like a fluid or a map feature. And so that's a difficult problem, though. Is what happens when water and blood mix? They should kind of mix together, but that's a storage problem on the map, and it's a problem for the CPU to handle that kind of mixing. And then there's rules for, well, what if you had oil, and what if you had sand, which are two things that we'd also want to do, so that you have kind of flowing sand that makes kind of pyramid shapes, so you can't just dig tunnels in the sand. You can now. It's kind of ridiculous. And you'd want kind of oil floating on water, and then you'd want to be able to set that on fire and all these kind of things. So those aren't quite in the hopeless bin yet. They're in the it would probably look bad when we're done bin, but that's never stopped us before. So it's tricky, and we don't have our solutions yet. So, but that's one of the big open problems on the table, is how to introduce more fluid to the game. It wouldn't really be a map storage issue because there's already a little flag that says, is it magma, is it water? And if you lost a few bits to that, just saying, what type of fluid is in the square, then that's not an issue. It's when you start mixing them, it gets to be a nightmare. Storage as well as the process for everything else. There's a question about how making Dwarf Fortress more accessible as kind of the last programming type thing or mechanics type thing. And, well, obviously it's not been our top priority out there. People feeling misery everywhere and then quitting. And we just have the same basic ideas other people have for that. Improving the crappy menus that are horrible, all screwed up, and so on. And because we know they're bad, it's like I've played modern games. I know what they look like, and I've seen a good interface before. And it's not like I'm completely tone deaf about that kind of thing, but it's not an easy thing to work on in a game that's always gutting features and always under development. It's hard to kind of stop and focus on accessibility for what would be quite a long time, getting it up to speed and then just wrecking everything again. And doing things like tutorials, I think, would be very helpful for people, just to because people get lost, of course, when they're they don't know how to dig. They don't know all these things, so it doesn't really tell you. And right now, I think the helpful D for designation, doesn't really help people dig. But putting in a tutorial is something we want to do, but that's also just a huge on development time because that gives you something else to maintain. And then as far as like graphics and the interface, people have had ideas like, well, why don't you have a giant XML kind of script or a Lua script and document them and so on, and it just becomes a huge sink. And we're still at this what we consider early stage of the project, just interested in adding things and not being slowed down too much. We just kind of make concessions to accessibility as we go. It's much better than it was in 2006, believe it or not, and it slowly gets better. And I think it's just going to be that continuing slow improvement process, chugging along, and continuing with our small audience of people that can play a game. And so it's a shame, but that's kind of the pattern we've fallen into. We're kind of happy with how things are going right now. Actually. Okay, so that's those are the questions I had on like technical stuff. So I don't know if anyone else had any questions about that kind of thing, like the meat of the game. The other two things, I don't know how long we're all going to stay in the room here, but it's the other big sections we had to talk about were just people had questions for me and like about the community or about general what's it like to program, that kind of stuff, and then some other people had questions about like, well, what about other independent games and things like Kickstarter, that kind of thing. So as far as technical stuff.
Yeah, so I was wondering, like, if you dealt with material deformation or anything like that for any of the, like, combat or anything, like, maybe, or is it just like a purely random process, like this axe chops through this hand?
So now every wound in combat is, in this sense, a deformation of a material that went horribly wrong, right? Now, and that's how it works. Right now, every tissue in your body has the yield, fracture, points to them, and it compares it to the material of the weapon. And then it has an elasticity thing as well. So the skin gives a bit, and that's where we get the bruising and so on. But then it'll fracture at some point. That's for kind of strictly blunt stuff. We have this fake edge calculation. I didn't really know how to do it, so we have the edge will allow you to kind of cut through materials once it gets up to a certain shear, because we have 6 different types of yield and fracture points. There's shear, torsion, which is only used in wrestling in one part right now, and impact, which is I guess more for bullets and things, and there's compression, but we use impact for being hit with a mace and so on. I don't know if there's a gradient between compression and impact yield, because right now there's just impact yield and compression yield, but it seems like a continuous process. I have no idea how that actually works. But one of the things, and maybe I don't know if this is what you're getting at in part, is things like item damage and so on is not in the game yet, and we're going to get there definitely at some point. And then I mean it's not completely impossible, because we have things like exoskeletons being dented right now. There's denting, which is different from the fracture. It's when the thing has been deformed, but it's not elastic. So it looks at the elasticity and says you've been deformed. And then if your elasticity, I don't remember exactly how the numbers work, but if you're not elastic, then you don't get to return to your original position, and then it just saves a dent wound. So only the creatures get information saved about how they're damaged, but there's dents, and there's denting damage. And so if you make you'll see it when you're fighting the big metal bronze colossuses, for instance, you can kind of cover them with dents as you're beating and deforming them, and then it just has a kind of catch-all. Well, you're too damaged, and you just sort of fall apart at some point, just to make the game possible. This is one of the biggest complaints we have with the game, with creatures that are impossible to kill, because it tries to do it through material properties, and then a bronze colossus is very difficult to kill in that situation, right? Because you just keep denting it, and it becomes deformed, but it can still move because there's no real definition for what it means to be alive if you're a big statue. And right now the game is very liberal about that. It just says, you're still alive. There's no death for a big statue until it just crosses some point. It's like, okay, you're dead. But I don't know if I answered your question at all, or the gist of your question or anything.
I mean, works for me.
Yeah. So it's not. It should be really cool when we start denting weapons and bending, because we've got the bending. There's bending yield, so we'll be able to bend a sword or dent a sword, twist them, all that kind of thing. And it should be entertaining to have your nasty little chip bent dagger or whatever. And then we'll get to rust, and it'll be even better. And then you'll be able to stab something. Yeah.
I had a pair of questions about magma, but if you're still talking. Okay, so first, right now magma is basically like slow hot water. I mean, aside from ignoring pressure. So have you tried to implement proper magma densities? Like, has that been something on your radar at all?
So now, in what sense? In the sense that
so realistically, if you drop like a cow down a volcano, it should just sit on top of the lava and burn to death. instead of falling down into the magma sea, revealing all minerals on the map.
Yeah, and so it was a thing that got lost when we went to 3D, because it used to be you could walk on top of the magma, and it would do a thing where it started melting your feet, setting them on fire. It was pretty cool. And then it went up your leg, and you'd catch on fire that way. And yeah, it's kind of the same problem as ice and thin ice, like having you walk on top of the fluids and having it understand things about that. And so it's like, but I haven't really thought about it. I mean, it's definitely one of those things that kind of went over under the radar, depending how you think about the radar and how it's not working. But it should be. It's the type of thing that seems like it'd be easy to do, right? Because we have swimming, and it's like swimming. Because you just say you always swim in magma, and then you slowly get swallowed and set on fire. So I think it's just an oversight. It's a big oversight, and I think. It seems like it'd be pretty easy to fix too.
Okay, and
you had another one?
Yeah, the second question is a material-specific one. It's like right now, glass can't decide if it melts in magma or not. Like some things made of glass will melt and others won't. I was kind of curious if that was just a bug or some decision relating to the objects or what.
Well, decision's probably a strong word for all these oversights, right? But it just gets big, and you don't like as you inflate the balloon, the surface area increases of the stuff we have to work on. So it's when it comes down to things like constructions, like there's probably three categories, maybe stuff I'm missing, but there's little teeny items, and those will generally melt and be destroyed, right? When things flow over them, those will generally be destroyed. Then you've got things like furniture that you put together in a building format, and I think those catch on fire, but they tend not to melt, especially doors. I don't remember how the temperature transfer, especially if it's not flowing over the item. Like if magma flows over a chair, it'd probably be more likely to die, even if the chair is placed as furniture, than if it hit a door, because the problem with temperature transfer with the magma is if the magma transfers the temperature to adjacent map squares, then the whole map has to be dealt with. And then when it goes into a stone with a low melting point, you kind of want that to soften. But you don't want the whole map to turn into magma. and so you need to track your temperature more carefully. And since our magma is not, it doesn't really have a temperature right now. It's sort of magical magma, and it's kind of, fantasy magma, right? This is a fantasy game, so magma doesn't just cool off. It's like it's there for your level, for your lava level, for your last level in your game or whatever, where you've got that. And it's a difficult problem to kind of. I mean, we have the temperature for every square, so I guess technically speaking, we're already tracking because we've got heat capacity or whatever. So we're already tracking the temperature, the energy in the square, and it could bleed off theoretically. And we've thought about that actually. But it's one of those processor issues where do you want to take the plunge into that, but it's not the whole question, because you can still ignore stone walls and not ignore doors, and that's this time I wouldn't call it an oversight because we've thought about it, but we haven't done it where all adjacent furniture will die. And then there's the step between doors and natural stone walls, which is a constructed wall of glass, which is something that turns into a map tile for storage purposes. It'll turn into a map tile. And then the game would need to kind of distinguish between natural stone and constructed walls. And that's just something we haven't crossed that bridge yet, but it's kind of an intentional oversight we haven't done yet. So I don't know if those were the same distinctions you were thinking of.
Yeah, no, that was exactly it.
Yeah, so you just haven't gotten there yet. We'd like to solve the problem. We have the information to solve the problem, but not the technical expertise yet to figure out how to deal with the temperature flows without killing the computer. Yeah.
Okay, first of all, you're awesome. Second of all, sorry if anyone else wanted to say that. Second of all, I know there are a few upcoming indie games, and I'm thinking like Clockwork Empires, if you've heard of it. If not, that's fine. They're going to use procedural generated maps, people, economies, buildings, that sort of thing. And I was wondering how you personally react to other game studios sort of adapting the ideas you pioneered and made popular. That's about it.
It's cool, right? I mean, we've got, because, I'd be a hypocrite if I had negative feelings about it, because I've kind of poached the crap out of roguelikes, right? So it's, and those are all, free games with people working for even less than I'm working for. So it's cool. It's cool to see all these things kind of come out. So kind of skipping, because people ask about this stuff for the last section I was going to talk about, but just skipping to that now. People ask have I tried any of these games, because there's a million of them, right? There's Game of Dwarves, No Moria, Goblin Camp, Ultima Ratio Regium takes, or Regnum, I don't know how to say it, takes some ideas. And I just haven't really had an impetus to actually try them out. It's not mostly because they're when they say this is a simpler version of Dwarf Fortress that is more accessible, then I've already kind of crossed the accessibility boundary into my own game. So it just hasn't, I haven't wanted to jump out and pay money to play one of those games. But I think it's cool. People are working on that stuff. I mean, there's sometimes when it gets a little cynical. Fortress Craft seems cynical as a name. I don't know anything about the game, but as a name, it seems like a cynical thing. It's like that, and people ask me what I thought about Minecraft being so successful. He cited Dwarf Fortress as one of the big inspirations for it. I mean, it seems like Infiniminer is probably the bigger inspiration for it. So I'd ask Zach Barth what he thought of it, and I'm sure he has an opinion about it. I don't know what that is. I have no idea what that is. I think it's cool that there's a game out there that a ton of people can enjoy. I mean, I feel a little weird when anybody makes $100 million. That seems a little off, just societally speaking. But so that's the only thing that kind of rubs me the wrong way about it. It's the same thing that rubs me the wrong way about Justin Bieber, I guess. But but you can't lose any sleep over that. Or if you do, you'll become like Che Guevara or something, and cause problems for everybody. So I think it's cool overall, and I think this indie games boom has been awesome. The internet's allowed things to happen that were happening before, but not anywhere near the same scale. I mean, when you look at old games like Doom, it was kind of the same thing, right? They passed out this shareware game that kind of got uploaded on BBSs and so on and passed around. So it's kind of similar to what was happening. They sort of invented a fake internet to get that game out, as far as I remember, where getting people to share it and so on. But now it's just easy for everybody to share their games. It's really cool how all that has worked out. I think just to the question, the only thing that bothers me about it is when people are kind of cynical about it, or promise the moon and know they're not going to deliver, that kind of thing, where they're like, this is going to be exactly like Dwarf Fortress with graphics, and I'm going to give it to you in 6 months. it's not true, right? So it's not cool either when it's not true. But a lot of people making these games have been honest about what they're doing, and that's awesome. So, yeah, that's what I think about that. So I guess, were there any other questions right now? So there was, we did a bit of the last part, but I guess I'll go through and answer some other questions that people had, just about programming in general and how things work. So and I'll answer this more like a Q&A, because it's kind of weird to have a big talk about yourself and how you program and so on, and just kind of sit and talk about, this is, I'm a programmer, and I do things this way or that, so it just sounds kind of weird. So someone asked if, how Dwarf Fortress initially worked. I had this, and the question specifically was, did I focus more on mechanics or the environment? Like, how does the game get off the ground? And in this case, it was sort of a strange example, because I suppose kind of came out as Mutant Minor game. So we had a very specific, small, almost arcade type thing we wanted to do. And so we focused on just getting a basic map up, getting dwarves digging, and so on, and not really adding like 9,000 types of stone. I mean, we're up to like 200 something types of stone and all the gems and things. That came a little bit later, and we weren't focused on that at first. But as the game started to take up our the banner of our giant fantasy game, which didn't take too long to happen, and it became more of a simulation, because we ultimately want to have kind of this sort of storytelling engine game, which we already got to a great extent, where people will tell stories, about their game and have a kind of story going on in game. But to do that, or at least we found it's effective to make a simulation first, to have a lot of meat to work with when you want to have stories. And so simulations kind of merge mechanics and environments. So as far as what we're focused on, it's all kind of the same thing. But the main thing for us is to keep the game playable. Dwarf Fortress was playable from day one, not fun, but playable. So you'd add mechanics so basically you don't set out and say, I'm going to work on adding mineral types for 20 days and not have something to play with. If you have a game to play with, you're more motivated. You start to feel the kind of the flow of the game early on, and so you can add to it, make subtle changes to add to that. It's just one of the reasons that, at least for a while, the early game of Dwarf Fortress it was pretty easy to get into, not accessibility wise, but better than the end game, which kind of mushes out a bit. But you always had this nice little goal of feeding your dwarves and so on in the beginning. As farm mechanics have kind of gotten too easy and so on, it's sort of the sleekness of it has fallen apart a bit, but that's all kind of stuff we've got ideas to fix that just haven't gotten to yet. But there's always this always keeping the game playable is the main feature of development for us. And I mean, that goes to one of the other questions: do I get to play the game myself? Not really. It's like always. It's always like a bug testing thing, or I try and play it, and I'm like, I'm going to have a fortress, and then I find something I want to change. And you can't change it when you're playing, so you play it, and then you change it, and then you start again. So it's not. It was strange too, because when we set out to make games when we were kids, it was always in spite of other games. Kind of, it's like they weren't quite doing the things we wanted to do, so we write a game for ourselves. And so we wanted to write games that we could play, and that's a big part of procedural content for us as developers. My brother and I, like I said, is procedural of content's not a story you're writing for yourself. If you write a story for yourself, it's not gonna, you're not gonna be surprised at the twist or whatever. So it was important for us to be able to play it, but then when you get into development, it becomes less about playing your own game and more about, just development itself is really fun. But you still get a chance to mess around with it even when you're testing. So that's how Fortress mode has turned out. Adventure mode's a little different because the game's so short, so I can still kind of do a human wave assault on a cave, and it would only take 10 minutes. So I can have fun with that. I can have fun with that, at least as a kind of a violent mayfly that's going to live for a few hours. So I don't know. It's not a bittersweet feeling though, not being able to play the game as much as I would have liked, because developing it is always entertaining. Another question was, what's the hardest thing about adding a new feature? Because we're adding new stuff all the time, and I tried to sit down and think about it myself, and it just kind of went through the process of adding a feature and talking about designing it, fitting into the code, and all that kind of thing. And I was thinking, well, it usually just kind of goes through pretty smoothly, and I wasn't, so I asked Zach about it, what he thought about that, my brother. And he said the hardest part about adding a new feature was showing restraint. And obviously that's the problem I have, because I would, like, when I added these new, we have these hill dwarves now, right, living out in the hills, and they have these gardens. There's the gardens on top of the mound, and there's the garden inside the mound. And the garden inside the mound, we have mushrooms already in the game, plump helmets and dimple cups and all kinds of little mushrooms that we have. We don't really have any outdoor plants, at least aside from like wild strawberries or something. There's just a few plants in the game. So I was like, we need to add garden plants. So I went on Wikipedia, looked up garden plants, and did Google searches for medieval garden crops and so on. And before long, there were about 50 new garden crops in the game, and that's cool, but maybe not necessary at this stage. And being able to put a damper on things and finding, because it is about that kind of thing, though. The game is about that kind of thing. It's kind of overdone variety and so on to give you a larger world to explore. But it's important to stop and be able to stop, especially when you got a game that's constantly in development. It's easier when you have a game where you have a design document. You say, I'm going to be done with this game in 8 months, and you have a deadline, and people are paying you, and that kind of thing. It's easier to put a boundary around what you're doing, but this is very free-form, so it's difficult. And so I think keeping it playable, keeping it fun, making it fit in with the code, but coming up with bite-sized chunks and knowing that you're going to extend this later to more features, but finding a stopping point, it's always hard. And it wouldn't be hard if I didn't fail all the time, and obviously I fail all the time at this. So I think that stands as a good thing for an answer. The hardest thing about adding a new feature. So someone else asked if the game turned out how we thought. Well, initially, of course, it was supposed to be something completely different, but getting past that and saying just as our large fantasy game, is it turning out how we thought? Yeah, pretty much. Because we had this old game, like I was talking about, Drag Slave from our C1, and we've stuck to kind of our vision for how that was going to work. That one got to a certain point and not further, and we're past that now pretty much, except for the bar fights and so on, which we're hoping to get to. But it's going about how we thought, and it's not hard to keep it steered that direction just because it's such a generic idea, right? It's like fantasy world simulator. People pretty much have an idea of what that should be like. We certainly didn't anticipate back when we were kids that our fantasy world simulator's main feature would be dwarf fortresses. That was an interesting thing to come out of the whole mutant miner experiment little game. that now we've got this Dwarf Fortress simulator sitting inside of our fantasy game, which is neat because and it's probably really fortuitous that that's the way it turned out because it kept our eye on sort of macro level features for the most part. I mean, we still drill down to all kinds of strange details, but controlling a community instead of a single adventurer to start has made us keep things like civilizations and towns in mind, which is something that we didn't get to after working on Slaves to Armagh, God of Blood for 5 years. We didn't really have towns or anything. It was just, it was not going well. Building from the bottom up was not a good idea, or it didn't turn out the way we wanted. And this one is we've kind of have a lot of bottom up detail, but we've also at least kept some threads of higher level details in there for things like trade and civilizations and so on. So I think that it's going well. It's going well. So let's see here. Oh, we got a couple of other things people asked about. And people often ask, favorite stories, favorite fortresses, that kind of thing. I'm not very good with those questions, picking out favorites, and so I've always kind of defaulted to a few stories that people probably heard. So I won't spend much time on those because my two favorite bugs were, for some reason, it stuck with me when a farmer was going to just go. He was supposed to go plant seeds in his field, and then he went to a furniture stockpile, grabbed a bed, walked over to his farm and planted it. And then he walked away from the farm, and it was just like job done. He went off and went to his room or whatever. That was just crazy. And then there was one that kind of stuck with me because it was just like when you have. We work by making little kind of real world analogs, all these little materials and items and things, coming up with rules and then letting them go, right? And so when things go wrong, it can sometimes just cascade for quite a while. So we had this dwarf that was so you have the hammer, right? Punishment. You beat the dwarves with the hammer when they're bad. And so what happens when the hammerer has been injured? He can't carry his hammer anymore, right? So when I think both of his arms were broken. I don't remember if it was in a goblin attack or whatever. And so he got a job to hammer. And so sometimes there's equipment checks, right? And when there's not a bug, there's an equipment check, which would say, the job item, you can't carry it too injured to continue the job. And we have that now. But when you didn't have that, he would say, okay, I got to go hammer this dwarf. So he somehow grab the dwarf and lead him, chain him up. And when he said it was time to hammer him, how hammering worked was it would set a flag on the dwarf not to resist and perform an attack, right? And because he had a hammer, he defaulted to attacking with his hammer. So when he doesn't have a hammer, he said, well, what attacks do I have available? And so when you don't have arms in the game, you have 3 possibilities as it currently stands. You can kick with either foot, or you can bite. And so now biting code has always been a little off. It's always, right now a cow is the same as an alligator basically in terms of biting capability because it goes by size, and bites are too powerful in general. We always have this notorious problem with the carp, right, with them biting too hard. So the hammer bit the guy's arm off. And it so happens that just for whatever reason, with biting creatures, we always figure, well, they're going to be biting again or they're going to die. So what it would do, the way the code was set up at the time, was if a biting creature goes to bite again, it'll spit out whatever's in its mouth, and it would just be kind of a little adventure mode thing that would be funny, a little attention to detail thing, right? It's like the arm drops away as it comes to attack or whatever, right? Well, the hammer, he did his job. He finished. He bit the guy's arm off, kept it in his mouth, and the job was over. So he didn't attack again. And he carried the guy's armor in his mouth for years. Walking around with his arm in his mouth. And, yeah, that was, that's one of my favorite stories. And as far as new ones, I mean, it's not that new. It came in with vampires. It's not as funny, but it was just to see what people were willing to do with their things. So in this game, vampires are one of the things that can be a nuisance in your fortress in terms of draining people's blood and so on. But they don't make new vampires very easily. We were going to kind of randomly generate vampires, so there'd be all kinds of different ways for it to be transferred. But the way it works now is you have to drink a vampire's blood and then you become a vampire. And so that doesn't happen too often in the fortress. But again, there's the kind of little pieces building up to a whole. So what can happen is if a vampire in your fortress is injured near your well system or your cistern, and they drop a bunch of blood in there, then every dwarf that comes to drink in your fortress will become a vampire. And so there was someone on our forum kind of weaponized that and sacrificed a vampire over the special tower they built with a cistern in it, and just kind of dumped the vampire's blood in there, and built a self-contained tower where he'd send these kind of sacrifice subjects, but they were to become his military, and he'd lock them in the tower until they drank, and then kind of let them outside. So he'd have this fortress, which was walled off, and then just kind of have this vampire military roaming outside from this blood tower that he made. And it was all just from that mechanic. So I thought that was pretty funny. So let's see. Yeah, a few more questions on this topic. We're kind of going into community stuff. So someone asked, does the community influence the design of the game? And there's kind of a because you don't want to say that it hasn't happened. In a sense, but I mean, something in me says that was like, we stuck to our vision basically of our fantasy game or whatever, and that's true. We really have. It is turning out kind of how we wanted it to turn out, and it hasn't deviated from that. But I think the community has been very influential on kind of what we focused on. Certainly, accessibility-wise, you would not want to see what the game looked like if we didn't have a community. It would be 100 times worse, if you can imagine. And also, the community in bug fixing has been, they've been, there wouldn't be bug fix without people helping out. But also, in terms of the direction, like we have the suggestions forum, and it's not like if someone makes a big, giant, sweeping suggestion that we're just going to take it and say, let's completely change our mind about what this is about. But there are a lot of small suggestions we take that make the game better. And people also remind us that now that the game is so big, it's something that I noticed more recently when I'm answering these Future of the Fortress posts. I have Future of the Fortress that I do, right, which is this question-answer session I do once or twice a month. I try to anyway. I fall behind sometimes, and then I end up having to answer 100 questions. And that's become very helpful lately because as the game gets larger and larger, and you've got quite a few people playing it, when you're adding a new feature, people will ask, oftentimes just an innocent question about how this feature is going to handle this aspect of the game and so on. And it'd be something that I just completely forgot about. Because there's so it's like people were saying with the magma, people walking on magma and so on. It's just, you don't notice everything because there's a lot to notice. And so I read the Future of the Fortress questions in part just to give me a lot of reality checks and reminders about everything, because there's this kind of NetHack motto for the developers think of everything for all these little things that come into the game. But that's not the developers thinking of everything, right? That's kind of a community developer interaction. That's how those games work, and that's how this game works. In terms of coming up with those things, we try to come up with everything. And we do come up with little clever things sometimes, so you've seen the goblins at night, right? The little two eyes, a quote for their glowing eyes when you see them outside of your vision range. But if you threw a knife at one of them and poked his eye out, it turns into an apostrophe. It's not a quote anymore because he lost one of his eyes. And that kind of little thing, it makes people think that the developers thought of everything, but it's not. The vast majority of things like that these days come from reminders and so on of people kind of helping us steer the ship through the troubled development waters. So let's see, one more, which would be, do we use mods? Have I tried mods? How much do I keep track of the modding scene for the game? Because we've got this giant modding forum. People should try those things out if they play the game. People will kind of fix things up and add stuff and do these total conversion mods. There's all kinds of stuff. And if I played the game more, I might play with the mods sometimes. I just don't get a chance, though. So it's not. I don't get a chance much to check out mods and so on. The time I see the most mods is when I'm fixing saves, because people will send in these broken saves, right? And sometimes I'll load up a fortress, and there'll be like dragon people walking around as my dwarves digging and so on, and they'll be like, what's going on? It's like, these are red draconians or whatever. And I'm like, okay, and fix the bug, and there definitely saw a mod there. So you see a lot of things like that, people that change things. I also interact with the modders quite a bit with new features. Sometimes I show them the tags in advance, or they'll kind of keep me up to date on what features I've recently changed that might impact the mod, and then I'll talk to them about how it's going to work, or they'll give me an idea about something to emphasize there that would be helpful for them that isn't, that doesn't distract me too much, and we can go ahead and add it in and so on. So I've kind of and like the one of the people that works on, I don't know if people heard of Stone Sense. It's an isometric viewer for the game, so you can play with some graphics if you want that. It's gotten pretty far along, and they've been basically trying to reverse engineer the game for years now. And I don't send them the code. It's just not something I want to have floating around. But they've kind of decompiled or deconstructed or reconstructed the headers of the game almost entirely on their own there. And so I have kind of I guess lines of communication with them when they ask me about things. I guess it's kind of fun to they'll deconstruct it and ask me about stuff or whatever on occasion. So it's kind of a strange little relationship there, but it's cool. So nothing like I don't play with this mod, and this mod, but it's there's some context there, and some I check some things out. So any questions at this point?
So there was a brief time in the past when Dwarf Fortress was featured in the Museum of Modern Art, and it's going to be more heavily featured in forthcoming, right?
Yeah. So there was I think it was last year from July to November, there was an exhibit called Talk to Me, which is it was about 1,000 different little things, like those little robots that they had wandering around Central Park where people would help them and tell them where to go. They had a little sign that said, like, take me to 32nd Street or something, or point me toward it. Not that you could get to 32nd Street from Central Park very easily, but they pointed, people would help the robots. And it was almost universally people would help the robots and not vandalize them. So there's some funny videos of that. And they had things like SimCity and lots of games, but other little strange things. It was a very large exhibit numerically there were many things there. In Dwarf Fortress, they had a Dwarf Fortress world map, and just kind of plastered it on the wall. And it was like an excuse for Zach and I to go to New York because we hadn't been there for a long time. And so we went and went to the exhibit, and we were looking all over the place for the Dwarf Fortress thing. We were looking at all this cool stuff, and like, well, where's the Dwarf Fortress thing? And we didn't see it because it was 15 feet tall. It was the entire wall was this Dwarf Fortress world map, and we were like, whoa, there it is. And so that was cool. And so what happened then the next year is they started reaching out to the Museum of Modern Art decided they were going to permanently collect some video games, and so they started reaching out to people that had the various copyrights or whatever, and like Pac-Man and Tetris and some newer ones like Cannonball Passage and Portal and Flow, and some of the ones in the middle like Myst and Another World and so on. There was about 14 games, and we were one of them. They just sent us an email. They're like, we're thinking about having this exhibit or this permanent collection, and we're going to exhibit it. It's going to be in spring of next year is where they're going to put it on display. I have no idea how long, because they're thinking of having a permanent video game kind of room, or it's not a wing, but it's a room. The Museum of the Modern Art has these kind of rooms where they put things, and I guess it's a permanent feature. And as they acquire more games, I think they're going to cycle them and just kind of cycle games. So right now they have a list of 40 games they want to get, and they'll have some number of them on display. And for us, they're going to have that giant world map. There's also a video that one of our tutorial guys is putting together. It's going to be probably 5 minutes of just kind of, here's a fortress, and these are all the cool things that are going on. And I mean, you can't. The interesting thing about the video game exhibit is, how do you show these things to people, right? It's like with Pac-Man, you could just have a Pac-Man arcade game there, but even that's a little dangerous because what if somebody wants to hog Pac-Man for 8 hours because it's free, right? You don't have to put a quarter in it. So they kind of leaning against. They do have some that you can play, but they're kind of trying not to just have it be a big arcade necessarily because it probably wouldn't work. So they're having videos and other types of interactive stuff that's not necessarily just going to have someone sitting there for 2 hours. So for us, they're just thinking of a little interactive video and kind of see where it goes from there. So that's in progress, and it's going to be ready in March or something. The date always changes. The museum time, I've discovered, is very different from journalist time, as I've done a few interviews now with magazines and things, and those guys will kind of write you the day before and be like, okay, let's get this done now, or whatever. I have a deadline, so let's get it done now, and we'll do, are you ready for tomorrow, or whatever. And museum time, and 2 months later, they'll be like, so I got your email, and we could have this ready for 3 months from now. And it's because they don't really care. It's going to get in the museum sometime, and it'll be ready when it's ready. So it was completely out of left field. I figured that I was in that one exhibit with the quirky things because I was a quirky thing, but then that's happening next Pac-Man for some reason. Other questions? I have a few more things. I guess I could just finish up the questions that people had for me to make sure we cover everything, and then take one final question thing. We're about 20-something minutes out. Is that right? From when you're going to get kicked out of here, people come in here to kick you. I guess Wayne. I don't know how.
There was no one in here behind us, so we're not going to get kicked out.
If anyone signed up for the 9 to 11 slot, maybe they can just wait. But I don't know when we're going to run out of steam anyway. But I did have a few more questions that I figured some secret person out there might be waiting on the answer. So, but there were the questions kind of. So I already talked a little bit about Dwarf Fortress inspired games. So I'll kind of skip that part. And And there was this, but it was this kind of this about like other games or the process of game making as a commercial thing. So someone asked if we regretted kind of not taking partners or making it into a larger project. How much would it cost to make it into a commercial project? And I'm satisfied working with it the way it is now. I mean, the commercial process seems to have a way of destroying games after a while. At least that's my perspective as a 34-year-old. I don't know how other people think about it. Just kind of seeing how games have developed and so on. That I wouldn't want to work for a studio. And I think that the turnover rate is after 10 years, 50% of people drop out of the industry. So it's not something that people stick with as a career necessarily. And you see a lot of complaints about kind of the soul-sucking nature of things. But there's smaller processes now, right? People doing things like Kickstarter, or just raising a bit of money and then selling the game and so on. And so it's not, that would be a dodge to say that, that it's kind of the studio thing is why we don't have more people working on graphics and so on. And I think there's a couple key issues then. One is that even with an extra person, adding graphics would just slow development way down. I mean, imagine trying to draw all of this stuff would be a slower process, and I couldn't add things kind of as flippantly as I add them now. I add a new workshop, you just need to come up with a few characters, but you'd have to coordinate with someone to draw it, and have to worry about how many pictures you can show at once, all that kind of thing. It's just kind of not something we're really interested in doing. And the other thing is that in terms of adding programmers and so on, I'm just no good at managing teams, and I have no idea how that works. All this kind of merging the different version control type stuff. It's just not something. And it's kind of one of the reasons I quit math to begin with. I used to be a math professor, and I'm just not a social guy that works in teams. It's such a social thing, right? Yeah. You wouldn't think it, right? That you figure it's just people, kind of working on their own little discoveries. I mean, maybe you guys have been in academics now enough that you've seen just how social it is. But, it's not for me. Like going to conferences and talking to people and making sure no one else is working on the thing you're working on, all that kind of stuff. It's just not something that would work for me. Working on Dwarf Fortress is kind of a larger team project. I think it would just fall apart for me. As for how much it would cost to run a larger thing, it's like I don't have any experience with that, but you can start to. I mean, you get a window on it now with these Kickstarter projects, right? When they're like, I don't remember exactly what they said. Like Wasteland 2 will cost $400,000 or something like that, right? So it seems like to get something like that done, where you want to have production values and so on, it costs $500,000 or $1 million to get those people together to do it. But at the same time, I'm not sure games like Moria and so on cost that much to make. Probably not. But then again, like I said, I haven't played those. So I don't know how the production values are on them. But it seems like it's doable. People have made these kind of undertakings. Whether or not they're more shallow or whatever, I don't know. But they obviously don't have all of the different things that we have, and to do that, I'm not sure. It seems like it is game design something you can just kind of throw money at and get done faster. It seems like it's always kind of the number of actual features you can build a design for and build in a period of time seems the same no matter how much money you're throwing at it. You can produce kind of peripheral assets or just tons of side quests, like a thing like World of Warcraft that just adds new stuff in terms of existing features, but they flush it out with 100 more areas or whatever, or 100 more quests or whatever. But actually fundamentally changing the design and adding a new mechanic just seems to add, linearly or exponentially, depending on how you intermesh them, to the time of the project. So I don't know that throwing money at it is actually going to be able to create more in-depth games. Certainly someone could create Dwarf Fortress now faster than I have, because there's been a lot of retreads and revisions to the stuff I've done. So it's not like this is a 10-year project for someone else who wants to get up to the point where we're at. It would take less time because we've kind of made a lot of the mistakes for them. So when you're talking about something like Clockwork Empires or something which is supposed to be it's a steampunk game, but I guess it's heavily Dwarf Fortress inspired. I don't know that much about it, but I'd certainly expect something. It's not not necessarily a simple game because they spent less time on it. They've had they should be able to get quite a long way, and I don't know how long they've been working on it, if it's a year or two or whatever, but they should be able to get quite a long way. It should be interesting to see what they come up with in the time that they've got. And they have a thing like Gaslamp Games or Gaslamp something or other. They have a history of taking things, at least with Dungeons of Dreadmore, taking a genre like the roguelike games and being able to put something together. So that's not necessarily going to disappoint everybody. So it should be worth looking at. And I guess the last thing that people asked about, and if I'm not mistaken, would just be what's the long-term effect of things like independent game successes, things like the big successes like Minecraft, but also stuff that's been kicked around a lot like DayZ and Dwarf Fortress, and also the long-term effects of things like Kickstarter campaigns. And I'm not much of a prognosticator. I haven't worked in the industry, so I can't see how the industry would change. It's hard for me to know. It seems like there are always a lot of people leaving the game development industry and going to work on other things. But when you look at people who wrote like the games I played when I was young, a lot of them just went into now I make a social media app, like an email emoticon thing or something was one of the examples. Or they went off and worked for marketing in Zynga or something like that, right? It was like it wasn't like they went off to make independent games. And that's changed now. You've got people that can kind of put their reputation as a developer of the past on Kickstarter and say, how much is that worth? People will pay them quite a bit of money, sometimes millions of dollars, to try again. Not try again, they were successful before, but to make another game. And so that's changed a lot. And there are also a lot of new people coming in just saying, I want $6,000, and we can put this game together, and people will do it now. So I think that process, especially with the big money ones, we haven't gotten through that, so we don't know how it's going to turn out. If those games are crap for the most part, or don't get finished and just kind of wash up and disappear, then people might be less likely to pay for that in the future. Although I'm not sure, because nostalgia is pretty powerful and people continue to pay for things. But if it's successful, then I think we're going to see a lot of not pretty high production value games come through those channels, and that's going to probably put quite a pinch on the AAA people. They already lose those people by giving them miserable work conditions, and then if they don't have to fund them anymore, then who knows? It's like I say, I'm not a big industry guy, so I don't know. I'm not going to say how things will turn out, but I think it's good. And if the games actually come through in this first wave of kind of bigger budget ones that are coming through Kickstarter, then that should be great for the future of things, because the creative process killed every franchise I cared about, or the industrial process killed every franchise I cared about growing up. I remember it was funny, because I used to play the Ultima games, right? And then they went to crap in 8 or like Ultima 8, Ultima 9, or whatever. And Ultima 7 was when EA was really kind of putting their hooks into them and kind of dumbing down the game and rushing it. And in that game, you at the time, I think the symbols that they had for EA were a sphere, a square, and a triangle, and those are actually the things you need to destroy in Ultima 7 to win. That was kind of their message to EA at the time. It was depressing, but now I feel like it's going to continue to get better. I think, yeah, it's just the internet crowdfunding. It's all there's so many independent games now. If you go on even places like Flash Games, places like Congregate or whatever, it's 50,000 games there, and most of them are garbage. But there's people that are allowed to work on these things that weren't able to before. Back when I was downloading games from bulletin boards with the modem and so on, there'd be like 50 or 100 games, and this would be over years of people writing them and uploading them. And now it's like you can't avoid them. I think it's a time that continues to be exciting, and I think that it's kind of the golden age of computer games doesn't really have a time. It just keeps getting better as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question that the person originally asked. I just kind of wrote down notes about what questions were asked to me about, and it was just a general question about long-term effects. But that's all I had, yammering on for an hour and a half or whatever. But I'll take questions as long as you guys got questions. If you guys don't have questions, then you have questions. But if you do, yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering how and why does the map generation reject certain maps?
So that's the map rejection process is set up when I don't have either an easy or was too lazy to code a fixer for it. Like for instance, I was talking about you make the map elevations and then you fill it up with water, right? That process is pretty finely grained, filling up with water. So you can get the percentage you want, and then you're satisfied. Now, when you get further along, and you have all your biomes, and you count up all of the forests, and you're like, it doesn't fall within the parameters. I have 10% forest, and this guy asked for 80% forest. I don't know a fixer for that. You could add rain and remove drainage and keep messing with it, but it's faster just to chuck it, start again, and let the random generator find an answer. Now, if the parameters are too extreme, it never will, and then it'll eventually throw up a warning and say, we couldn't make a world for you. Would you like to turn this rejection off and just let it ride on that particular rejection type and ignore it from now on? But it's mainly just to, because I don't have the perfect map generator that can cover all eventualities, I just put in tests. And so sometimes it gets up to ridiculous numbers. But a lot of the rejections are early just because it couldn't massage the elevations quite right. It's like if it wanted something like 50% water exactly or something like that, and it was increasing the elevation and there was just enough flats that it went from 40 water and increased it by 1 and then went to 60 water, there's nothing it can do short of redrawing the elevation to fix the map, and that's what a rejection would be in that case. That's why there's a lot of early rejections based on, it's because it's not just land and water, it's high, medium, and low elevation, so it's a little more complicated to massage the map. And if you massage the map too much, you end up with something that looks unnatural. That's one of the other big things about rejections is if you try to fix the map could stop looking random. Like if you don't have enough mid-level elevation, so you want to take either some of the ocean and raise it up, or you want to take some of the mountains and smooth it down, you could end up with these really unnatural flat areas. And these are things that I've seen. It's one of the reasons that we do it this way. You just end up with these flats that don't look nice, at least the way I was doing it, where you just kind of pick the mountain elevations and decrease their height. And it's better just to toss it and let a completely new random element come in. And the only rejections that really hurt, and I guess there's two kinds. If your parameters are a little narrow and then it just rejects 500 times and you're just get bored to death with it. Or when you're hit the civilization phase or something and it's placing civilizations and it placed 25 civilizations, but it wanted 26, couldn't find a spot for the last one, and it tosses you back to the beginning. But that's one of the things where can you massage to get that last civilization in? You might be able to try and find a spot for it, or just say, well, the person didn't actually want 26, but they did. That's what the parameters are. So it tries to, it follows the parameters that we're given to it. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the gist of your question or not. Okay, so anything else anyone was curious about? Anything at all? Got Dwarf Fortress on the table, everything else on the table?
Thanks a lot.
You good?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
It's been great.
Okay. That's good, because my hand is asleep. Lost function. This is the first time I've ever done kind of a Skype video phone simultaneous thing, and I'm glad it worked, because we were trying to get this video conferencing room to work. Most advanced room in the Pac-10, I hear. Something like that, the guy said. But, you know, we look like we built it out of shoestrings now or whatever, but that's cool. So, yeah, I'm glad hopefully people enjoyed themselves and learned what they want to learn, and people can go play the game now and wait for the next release. Probably in March at the earliest, but I'm trying. It's got all kinds of new stuff. It'll be crazy. All kinds of armies running around, and yeah, don't get too attached to the shopkeeper in your hometown, because they'll probably end up with their head on a stick sooner or later. Yeah, that's pretty messed up. But big trees, multi-tile trees, all kinds of stuff. It should be really entertaining. And rescue kidnapped children now. It's great. You know, to just wait for them to come back and attack you later. Okay. All right.
Thank you again.
Okay, I'm shutting down. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
You just seem like a back over.